Hello and welcome back. So today we're going to be making my newest FPP block. I'm calling it, I think we're going to call it the Feathered Star, but it is an absolutely stunning block. Hope that you can see it. It is just, honestly, it's probably my most favorite block I've ever seen, really. And then I did another sample too, so I'll show you what that looks like. So this is the same fabric collection. It's a fabric collection by Poppy Cotton called Painted Blossoms, I think. Anyhow, I just used fat quarters, and like I said, I used coordinating fat quarters. So the pattern will make a secondary pattern up here in these corners. It'll make extra squares as you put all these big blocks together. So I did make sure that on both of those samples that I made, that is the same. So anyhow, I have discovered in the last couple of weeks that I can't stand traditional piecing. I think that there's a lot of people that love it, and I think that's just wonderful. But for me, I think I can't stand it. So I've decided that FPP is the way that I like to go. So I think that's what my niche is just going to have to be. I think that trying to force myself to do something that I don't like and that I don't love isn't going to work so well for me. I think that I just need to go with my strengths, and I really, really like FPP. I like it because of the precision. I like it because it means I'm not having to cut out all those little tiny itty bitty little pieces, you know, 1.5 inch square here and a 2.5 inch square there. I don't have to worry about my pieces being stacked up and labeled and all that other stuff. I get to just print out my pattern, figure out what fabrics I want, and then I can just go. So because this is a large, complicated FPP pattern, I'm doing a video to go along with the pattern that is also releasing today, just so that you can see a way to assemble it without too much headache. Now, these angles that are in the pattern are 45 degrees. So I'm going to show you in the upcoming video how we're going to do these angles so that you're wasting as little bit of fabric as possible. But anyhow, I hope that you enjoy making this block as much as I have. Like I said, it just makes me smile every time I make one. I think that it's just so fun. The pattern is going to have sizes to make a 10.5 inch block, 12.5 inch, 14.5, 16.5, and 18.5. So there'll be 5 different sizes in the pattern, so you get to choose whatever size you want to do. And then in the instructions that I've provided in the pattern, there are written instructions that are going to go over everything that we're going over today. And I also put in there what it looks like if you have, you know, multiple blocks, if you add sashing between the blocks or no sashing. So that way it gives you a little bit of an idea of what you can do with the finished block once you're done with it. So anyway, let's get started. I hope that you have fun, and I hope that you love this block as much as I do. Okay, so today we're going to be working with a light box. So I tried to do a foundation paper piecing tutorial a while back, and I had my light box in there, but it wasn't very bright, and I didn't realize it was because it wasn't charged up. I have one of the Caterpillar premium pads, so you can charge it up and use it cordless, and I didn't realize that it wasn't charged. Anyway, I'm going to show you today how to do this with a light box. So if you don't have a light box, all you need to do is take your pieces and just kind of hold them up to a light source so that you can see where it is you need to be cutting. Anyhow, we take our pieces, printed them out. Now this is just for one of the corner pieces. That's all I'm going to do on this tutorial. And then I'll go back and put the whole thing together for you. However, you just want to print out your pieces, and then you're going to pre-fold them like we've talked about before. So wherever your lines are, we're going to go ahead and just pre-fold those. And I printed these on newsprint, so sometimes I end up with some little wrinkles in there. So if you end up with wrinkles like I did, just we can work around them. Anyhow, we're going to put these all aside except for the bottom ones. So these are the ones that are going to start our feather. I call it a feather, snowflake, I mean, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, I always start with the biggest ones and then work my way up. So these are written to where this is the last one and this is the first one. So this is G1A1 and it goes this way. I'm actually going to start from this end because these go straight across, so I'm not really worried about it. They're going to be just fine if I start down here, but I'm going to go ahead and start down here because these are going to be my background pieces, my number 1 piece, or excuse me, my background piece. So I'm going to go ahead and take some of my scraps. So I am using as my print here I got some leftover bits of my fat quarters from another project that I did. I just happen to love this line. It's painted something from Poppy Cotton. Anyway, I bought 3 fat quarter bundles of it, so I've only gone through the 1. So I have plenty left over, but anyhow, this is what I'm going to use for this. So this angle right here in this pattern is 45 degrees. So in order to eliminate as much fabric waste as possible, I'm going to show you how to handle this angle to where you're going to hopefully have minimal fabric waste. Okay, so I already have an angle cut here just from another project, so I'm going to put just a tiny little dab of glue right under here, my starter piece. Now, because this is a background piece, it's a solid color, so it doesn't matter if it's face up or face down. But if this were a print, I'm going to be sewing on this side. My fabric goes on the back side. So if this were my first piece and this were a directional, or not directional, if this were a print, it would have to be face up because the first piece that goes on is face down. Okay, so you're going to be right sides together. So like I said, if this is not a solid piece and this has a right side and a wrong side, it's going to be right side up with your first piece, and then your second piece is going to be right side down. So here's how we're going to handle this angle. Okay, so again, this is a 45 degrees. So we're going to take this piece here and it's going to be this direction. So our print goes, or our design goes this way, but this piece, because this is a 45 degree angle, we're going to go to 45 degree, or excuse, yeah, we're going to go to 45 degree when we put the fabric on. So we're just going to make sure it covers up just a little bit of where it needs to be. So it covers up this line here and then this line over here, and we're just going to go and sew it. So we're just going to grab these right here and we're going to sew, and then when we come back, we're going to trim that little bit off before we fold it over. But this is always how I start these, just so I make sure that I can at least get my angle correct. So let's take it over to the sewing machine and we're going to start sewing, and then we'll come back here and start cutting. Okay, I'm going to straighten that up just a touch, but here we are, and I've got my what is it? I've got my stitch length. I'm sorry, I just had a complete and total freeze of my brain. So my stitch length is set to 1.25, and now we're just going to sew along that line. So our fabric is here in the back. If you notice here, it's on the back, and now we've flipped it over and we're sewing on the front. So we're just going to sew that first line between those 2 pieces right there to the end, and then we're going to cut it off, and I'm going to show you over how to do it, what to do next. Okay, so now we've got this sewn together, and we're just going to take this and we're just going to take the outer quarter ruler. The reason why I like the outer quarter is because it has that little ridge right there, so that it fits really nicely over the paper. Like if you put it, you can just butt it right up against the paper. Then we're going to trim off that little piece just to kind of get it out of the way. And now I'm going to show you how that angle works out so well. So now that's our 45 degree angle. So see how it just fits exactly the way that it's supposed to now. So now we're going to flip this back over. And because this is what we just basically attached, we're going to fold it right there. And now we're going to trim this off, get this out of the way. And now we're going to put a little piece of white there, which is my background fabric. And if you've noticed, I haven't trimmed this yet. I will trim it here in just a moment once I get to the main beef of that. But we're just going to go through our scraps. I do have a pile of little tiny scraps up here. I always try to use the smallest scrap that I can, just to help me get my fabrics used up. So this one, I'll audition it and it's not going to cover. So let's see if we do it a different way, if it'll cover. Actually it will. So we're going to move it up just a touch. So the edge here, right here is our seam allowance under there. You may or may not be able to see it, but we're going to put it as far up as we can to make sure that it does cover. And it does cover. So now we're going to take that over to the machine. We're going to pinch this, flip it over, and then now we're going to sew it together. Okay, so now we will just sew right there on that line. And I always like to trim my little fabric tails. You can trim them or not trim them, or trim them all at once. I just happen to like to get them trimmed. And then now we're gonna flip that, and then we're gonna flip it back over and trim this up. Okay. And now we're ready for that final piece. Like I said, this should have been number 1, but we're just starting at the opposite end, so it's really not going to affect it because it's a straight line. If it were a little bit different, you know, it may have been a little bit of a different story. And I'm going to go ahead and pull this up just real quick, just before this glue dries too much. Actually, I think I'm too late. Anyway, so now we're going to take this, and we're going to take that angle at 90 degrees, the same way. You see how it's like this? Now we're going to make sure that we're going to flip it over, audition it, and make sure that this is as far down as it needs to be. And we are good. So now, oops, we're going to take it back over to the machine and sew this part on. Okay, oops. Okay, so just pinch it carefully. And now we are back at the machine to sew that part on. Clip the little tail, and now we will fold it over, and we are good and covered. So now what I like to do at this point is just kind of take my ruler and just rough cut, get this out of the way a little bit. I don't know if you have noticed, but the way that I do these when I'm making these is, this is our seam allowance. So this is where we're going to trim the final piece. I always leave a little bit of extra around here. I think if you've watched my videos enough by now, you know that I like to leave a whole lot of extra. Some people may think it's wasteful, and it certainly can be wasteful, but for me, it's just a little bit of a fail-safe in case I make a mistake. So if you would rather trim it up on these edges before you get started, please feel free to do that, but this is just the way that I do it. And then you're going to trim these, and some of them aren't long enough to be trimmed, and that is okay, as long as they're covering and give us enough fabric to attach the other piece to. It is totally fine. So now we're going to go through my scraps here and find another piece. So this one looks like it will fit perfectly. So now we're going to take that to the machine and attach this piece. Okay, so now our piece is done. So typically what I've been doing, because I have made a few of these, of course, in my samples, is I will stack these all up just like this, untrimmed, and then I take them over to my big table over there and cut them all at once. And the reason why I do that is because my little tiny ruler here isn't long enough, and I also don't get a lot of leverage sitting at the table or sitting at my chair here, so I just stack them up and cut them all at once. So what I like to do is, again, I like to do both of the bottom pieces first, then I move to the next one. So I'm going to go ahead and do that next piece in fast forward, and then we will come back together and do the middle piece in just a second. Okay, so now I have both of the bottom pieces done, and as I mentioned already, I'm going to trim them all at the same time. So we're just going to set those aside for the moment. Now the next ones I'm going to do are the middle pieces. So in order for me to get the correct size strip to work with, I usually just kind of, you know, fold this out of the way, set that there, and then just do a rough cut of what I'm going to need. I think I just did a little wobbly line, but that's okay. Anyhow, these also, I've made some of the blocks off camera, so these are the little cutoff strips that I have left, so these are going to be what I'm going to use to finish these up. But we're going to just put this right here, and we're going to use a little touch of glue. I keep trying to do it without glue just because I hate that little glue dab on there, but it's so much easier when the fabric stays where it's supposed to stay. But we're going to go ahead and cut that, get that out of the way. We'll set this one aside because it'll probably work for the other piece. But anyhow, now we're going to flip this over and we're going to take our pieces and figure out which one's going to work. I think it's this one. And we're going to set that right there on that angle and then just double check and make sure that it's going to fit, and it is not. And I'm going to show you why it's not. So when we fold it over, if you can see there's a bit of the seam allowance left, so we have to have that seam allowance in order to attach everything together. So I'm going to go ahead and take these strips, move them out of the way because they are not going to work at this point. So I will go ahead and take my sheet, or not my sheet, my fabric that I have, you know, left over from other projects. That's what I'm going to be using on these. So we're going to do the same thing that I just did with the white, and we're just going to, you know, cut ourselves a bit of a strip to use. I'm going to use my ruler here just to make my line just a touch straighter, but we're just going to cut off a piece that we can use there, get it out of the way, and then now we're going to angle that piece so that we can get it the right angle in the right spot. So the angle that I'm looking for, or the placement that I'm looking for when I'm using this nice and straight and flat like this, is I want to make sure that first off the fabric covers this line up here by about 1/4 of an inch, and it also has to meet this line here and go over by about 1/4 of an inch. So this needs to reach this about, you know, there. It doesn't have to go all the way, but right about this placement looks pretty good to me. Now we're going to take that over to the machine and get that sewn on. Okay, and now we're just going to take that little add 1/4, cut that out of the way, and then you'll see that we have a perfectly angled piece there. So now we just trim that up because we do not need any more on this one. So we'll just get this one out of the way. Hopefully we can use it for another piece. I'm not sure if it's going to work or not, but we're going to see. And then the next one is the additional background piece across the top here. So we're just going to get our little pieces out of the way and now try to find a small strip that's going to work. I think this one will work. So we'll flip that over. Let's just double check and make sure. Yeah, it looks like we are right on with that. Actually, you know what? This is the piece that I set aside to use on my next one. No, this one is. Let's see if we can find a different piece. This should work. And if you notice here, I've got a little bit of the selvage. I'm not worried about that because it's not going to be visible, but we're going to put that there. Now sew it on. Okay, so now we have one of the middle pieces done now. So we are going to do the same thing we did with the other piece, and we're just going to set it aside. I'm just going to trim off a little bit of this excess right here. And then I'm going to set it aside in that pile over there, and we're going to trim it up all at once. And then now I'm going to go ahead and complete my second piece, and then I will catch you back here and we'll do the top piece together. Okay, so now I have these both of these pieces done, so we're just going to set those aside and trim them all up together. And now we're going to work on these pieces. So these pieces are pretty straightforward. These are just some cast-offs, leftover pieces from the ones I was doing before, so we just want to make sure that this lines up. This one's not going to work. I think I might have another one. There we go. This one should work. This one, and when I say it should work, what I mean is you have to be able to look through the light box here and you can see that you've got 1/4 of an inch all the way around these dark lines here. So these are the pieces that we need to be, you know, covered. So that's the piece that we need to be covered. So we got to make sure that it's going to cover it all the way. And now I get to show you So we're sewing from this side, right? This is our first piece. So this first piece is printed, so it is print side up. Now this next piece is print side down. So being that it's a background piece and it's a solid piece, it doesn't really matter again, but it would normally be right side to right side, okay? So now we're gonna go ahead and sew this. Okay, we're gonna fold that up, and I'm gonna go ahead and just cut that and get it out of the way just because I don't really like to see all that stuff hanging over. And now we are going to just trim up right here, and then now we're going to go to the final piece on this section. So we're just going to take a block of pink here. This is the pink that I've chosen for this project, and it can be square just like this, just as long as it meets both of the seam allowances on each side and then covers the top up there. So we're going to go ahead and sew this on. Okay, and now it's sewn on, so we're going to flip it up and make sure, and yes, it absolutely fits. So we are just going to cut that and get that out of the way. Now we need to make the second piece, so I will go ahead and do that, and then we will come back here and chat about the next steps. Okay, so now we have all of our pieces done. So obviously we still have to trim them up, but now that they're made, the next thing we have to do is do this centerpiece. So this is what's going to print out for you is two different pieces like this. You're going to take one of your pieces and fold it over right there on that line. So you've got a line here and a line here. So you're going to take one of them, just fold it over nice and crisp, and then you're going to line that up with the line there. Make sure that all of your lines are connected properly. So you see this continued, all these lines, you know, in the right place. And then you're going to take just a little piece of not masking tape, or magic tape, scotch tape, whatever you call it. And you're going to tape those pieces together. And just put a little piece of tape right there. And then you're going to have your last piece. So there's no sewing involved in this one, but I do like to put just a little touch of glue in 3 spots. So on each end and then in the middle. And then we're going to take everything over to the big table. I'm going to do that off camera because I'm sure you don't want to see me trim it all up, but we're going to go and we're going to trim all of our pieces. The first thing that I'm going to do though is press them flat. So I'm just going to take my iron, press everything nice and flat so that when I trim them all up, everything's exactly where it needs to be. But we're going to trim all these sides, and then we're also going to trim these little chamfer edges right here. So these chamfer edges are where all of this stuff lines up. So we're going to go ahead and again, we're going to put glue on these pieces here, put a piece of our background fabric on it, trim it all up, trim all these pieces up, and then I will meet you over here and I'll show you how to assemble the first part of this block. Okay, now that we have all of our pieces made and everything has been trimmed, I trimmed it to the seam allowance, which is right here, which is the slight dotted line. These are the sew lines. These are the seam allowances. So everything's all cut and trimmed. So now we just need to sew the pieces together. So I've laid them out just kind of as they are, but we're just going to take these pieces, flip them over, and then you're just going to line up your corners. I do leave the papers in definitely through this step because they do help make sure that you have a nice straight sew here. But I just want to point out those chamfers I was talking to you about. You see how it lines up right here along this angle? That's what those are for, because when you're dealing with angles and you're putting all your pieces together, it's hard to envision where they're supposed to go without those little chamfers. So that's why those are there. So anyway, we're going to clip those together, and then we're going to clip these together. And then we are going to go to the machine and sew these together. So you want to sew on the line. So you want to sew right here. So here and so here, and then we'll come back and add these pieces. Now, when I'm done sewing these on, I am going to take the paper out of the seam. So just this little strip here and this little strip here that's going to get perforated. I just like to do that. For me, it's a personal preference. I do like to take them out of the seams. Anyway, we're going to sew these together real quick, and then we'll come back and do these. Okay, so I do like to do a little bit of chain piecing when I'm working with pieces like this. It just, you know, saves a little bit of thread. So we're in the same stitch length of the 1.25, and obviously we're just going to go down this little line here across both pieces. Clip out of the way. And here's where I just chain piece, which I just take my other piece, line it up where it needs to go, and then just keep going along there. Again, it just saves me a little tiny bit of thread. It's just a little bit easier than having to clip it and get started again. Okay, so now we've got these sewn on, and like I said, I'm just gonna take the papers out of those little seams. Again, I find it to be a little bit easier for me. You can do whatever you wish, but like I said, for me, you know, I like to do it this way. And then we're gonna add our next piece. So just finger press these open, just kind of, you know, use your fingers and press down as hard as you can. Take this piece and clip it the same way. So we're going to make sure that our corners are lined up here. And then we're going to make sure that that chamfer is right where it should be. And it looks like I need to move it just a touch. And there we go. So like I said, your chamfer is going to meet right up there at that edge. Your corner is going to meet here. And obviously we're going to do this with both of them. And then we're going to go to the machine and sew them both together. And then we'll come back here and I'll show you how to add that center sashing strip that we made a minute ago over at the table. Okay, they're sewn together. Let's just pull the papers out of these seams real quick. And then we'll press them open, and I'm going to show you how to put that other piece in there. So I know it's very tempting, because there's no sewing on this last piece, it's very tempting to just, you know, cut it and leave it the way that it, you know, just add your own little piece in there without worrying about gluing it to this. But I'm going to caution you against that. And the reason why I'm going to caution you against that is because of these little edges here. These little edges are going to help you line them all up. So it will be a little bit more difficult to do without that. You can certainly do it if you want, but I wouldn't exactly recommend it. Anyhow, the next step is you're going to take one of these pieces. It doesn't matter which piece, honestly. You can choose whichever one you want, and then just start lining it up. So you're going to take the edge of that chamfer, so one of those little chamfer edges there, and you're going to line it up just like that. Okay, so I'm going to clip over there, and the way that I like to do it is go down to the other end and clip the other chamfered edge. And that way, if there's any kind of waviness or wonkiness in it, we can kind of ease it in back there. And then I also like to flip this over and just finger press these open. So that way, when I'm sewing these two pieces together, that seam is pressed open. It just makes it makes it a little bit easier, in my opinion. But again, you can have them go to one side if you want to. But for me, I like to go ahead and press them open. Then we're going to flip it back over and just clip down these edges here just a little bit, just to make sure that you're in the right spot. I'm just making sure that my little open seams there get caught up in the clip. And now we're going to take it over to the machine and we're going to sew down that line again. Now I'm also going to tell you that in a couple of these that I've made, because there's nothing that's actually sewn, this paper's not sewn to anything, it's just a couple little dabs of glue, it may fall out. We'll see. We're going to test it out and see, but anyhow, we're going to just sew this line right down here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and leave this seam paper in only because I think it might help me to not have this fall off. That paper that's, again, only a couple of dabs of glue, so I'll peel that out of the edges here in just a minute, but we're just going to finger press it open as best we can here. And now we're going to take the other piece. Make sure that you're lined up like this, okay? You don't want to be lined up like this. You've got to make sure that your dark pieces or your bottom pieces, you know, that everything lines up the way that it should. So double check, make sure that you're in the right place. And then you're going to attach these two pieces together. So same thing, we're just going to line up those champers right there on the edge. Now we're going to go down to the other side and do the same thing just to make sure that we're all lined up. Okay. And then we're going to open up those, you know, finger press those seams open. Again, this is my preference. You do not have to do this if you don't want to. I just think it makes it a little bit smoother. And then we're just going to go down the line here, put a few clips in there, make sure that everything is properly clipped together. Right along here. And along here. Okay, and now we're going to take it to the machine and we're going to sew along that line. Okay, and now we have one of our 4 corners completed. So this is a very straightforward pattern. I know that when you print everything out, it looks very intimidating, it looks very scary, but I wanted to go ahead and do this video to help make it a little easier for you so that you know that it's literally, if you just, you know, go section by section, attach all the pieces together, you will be fine. Now this next section that we're going to talk about, or the next video, what we're going to cut to, is putting all of your blocks together. You're going to make 4 identical blocks to this one, okay? So make 4 just like this, and then we're going to come back together, add the sashing, and put it all together, and you're going to have a beautiful block at the end of it. Okay, so now we have all 4 of our quadrants completed. So I have left the papers in them just so that it gives a little bit of stability to the block. But the next thing we need to do is attach the sashing. So you're going to take 2 sides, so you know, these 2 sides and these 2 sides, and then we're going to put sashing in between them. So I have gone ahead and I've already used my my fabrics and created the little block pieces for H, J, and I. And also I started the one for K because this one's a 2-color one. So I'm just going to set this aside for the moment. And we're going to do the sashing for the pieces. So basically all we're going to do is get some clips. And of course I forgot my clips, but we'll just stick them right there. We're just going to set these aside for just the moment. It doesn't really matter. These are exactly the same, and the quadrants are the same also, so it doesn't exactly matter how those are going to line up. But basically, we're just going to take these 2 pieces, and then we're going to attach a sashing to one piece. So just, you know, line it up there. It's very simple, nice and square. It should be nice and even. Okay, and we're just going to set that right there, and then we're going to take these next 2 and do the same thing. Just kind of pick a side, or pick one that we're going to attach it to. And then we are going to take these to the machine and attach the sashing pieces to the blocks. So we're just going to sew these 2 pieces, and then we're going to come back and attach the second set to these pieces. Okay, now we've got these sash pieces sewn onto these bottom parts. So then the next step we have to do is attach this sash to this on both of these actually. So we're just going to flip it up, and then just a fair warning, make sure that you are attaching the right piece to the right piece. Now, not on this step, but on one of the other steps, I accidentally attached the wrong piece on one of my samples. So it is an absolute pain to have to pick out a stitch length of 1.25 inches or 1.25 millimeters. So just double check before you attach these that you've got the right piece to the right piece. So this is correct. And now we're just going to flip it upside down, or, you know, well, I guess it is upside down, and clip it. And if you'll notice, my seams were finger pressed open, so it does make it nice and clean on the back here. And when we're all done with this block, I'm going to take you over to my ironing board and we're going to iron this together because I want to show you just a couple little tricks to make it nice and smooth. And we're just going to flip this over and just verify, yep, it's nice and even back there. Now we're going to do the same thing with this one. Since this one's correct, this one should be correct, but again, you just want to make sure that you're putting it in the right position, and right now we're in the right position. So there we go. Like I said, we're just going to flip it over real fast, verify. Yep, we're nice and even. Now we're going to take it over to the machine and we're going to sew along this line. Actually, you can flip it over, sew along this line. It really doesn't matter which approach you take, either the front or the back, but just sew along that line to attach the final sash, or to attach the sashing to these pieces. Okay, now we have the sashing pieces added to each side, and I am going to go take these over to the iron here in just a second and press them flat. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because then we make sure that we're nice and flat when it comes to attaching the other sash piece. It just helps to make sure that everything's all nice and lined up. But this is what you're going to be left with right now, is this, and then now we're going to add the sashing pieces over here. So I'm just going to fold these up and get them out of the way for the moment, because we do have to do a tiny little bit of assembly to get that middle sash piece. Now I did these with 2 separate pieces. I could have put them all on the same page, but when that happens, you end up getting this cut in half and then you have to line everything up. So I just divided these in 2 just to make it a little bit easier for you. But we have our K section, which is 2 pieces, which is going to be one of the sashing pieces plus that little tiny bit, that little tiny block that's going to be right there in the middle. So just take whatever piece you have that you want to put in the middle there. I'm just using the fabric that I'm using is this right here. So you can do whatever you want in the middle, but for me, that's what I'm using, because all of my blocks are going to be that same print in the center, because I'm going to do lots of these different blocks with different fat quarter pieces in the same bundle. So all of my corner pieces here are going to be the same, and then that center piece is going to be the same. So again, you do whatever you want, but this is the way I'm going to do it. So we're just going to take this to the machine and sew right along there. Okay, so now we're just going to flip that over, and now we're going to trim it. So get the ruler, and we're going to trim it right along the seam allowance there. And then I'm going to go ahead, actually no, I'm not going to worry about that. Well, you know what, I am just going to kind of get those out of the way a little bit, just so that visually I don't mess up my train of thought there. And then we're going to take these, the K pieces, which is just this little K section here, which is these 2, and we're going to attach it to J. And this gives us the full length of our piece here. And you know what? I think I'm going to go trim this real quick at the table, just so that I'm right there along the seam allowance, so that when I attach these, my brain doesn't get messed up. So give me just 1 second. Okay, sorry for the confusion there. Sometimes I waffle back and forth in my head which way is going to be the best approach. And to be honest with you, I'm glad I trimmed these up, because now I don't even have to think about how they're going to line up. So we're just going to align them right here at the top. Take this over to the machine and sew right here. Again, you can approach it from either side. You're just going to sew right there to attach these 2 pieces to make the big center sashing. Get that clip out of the way. And just sew that right there. Okay, now I've got my side pieces ironed flat, and it's time to attach that center sashing piece. So the one that we just created, which is the J and the K pieces, is going to go right here in the middle, and this little square is going to line up right there in the center. So here's how we're going to do this. Because we want to make sure that this lines up, we're going to go ahead and attach it and just line up these little pieces here at the seams before, well, that's the first thing we're going to line up when we clip, is we're just going to line up those 2 seams right there. Just make sure that they're nice and even, and they are. And now we're just gonna attach the rest of this little strip to our block, and then we're gonna take it over to the machine and sew it on, and then we're gonna finger press it open, and then we're gonna come back and attach the other side. So it's very straightforward. I realize that this pattern has a ton of steps, which is why I did this video, is just to kind of help you through these steps, but I'm telling you, it's straightforward. It's just a little bit intimidating, I think, when you see all the different pieces that are involved. But now we're going to take it over and we're just going to sew along this line here, and then we'll come back and attach the other side. Okay, and now what we're going to do is we're just going to finger press that open. I'm just moving that other one out of the way a little bit just so that I have plenty of space to be able to attach this. And you see how those lined up perfectly? That's exactly what we want. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So again, we just want to make sure that we're attaching the right pieces to the right pieces. So just kind of eyeball it, make sure you're, you know, not doing this. Make sure you're doing it like this. Flip this over, and now we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to line up these seams and make sure that we're good and even. Clip those together right there in the center. And then we're going to clip the rest of it to this piece. Now, just for your information, just as you're clipping this, make sure that that center piece and that little, you know, this little tiny sashing piece doesn't fold down or anything. Sometimes it can fold down and fold out of the way. So just make sure when you're clipping this that this piece is still upright. I just don't want you to mess it up, because like I said, it is an absolute pain in the tush to have to pick out a stitch length of 1.25 millimeters. Trust me, I know, I have done it myself, and it is not a pleasant experience. So just make sure you're good to go before you start sewing. Now we're going to sew this together. So again, you can approach it from this side or this side. It really doesn't matter. There's not really any seams you need to worry about, but now we're going to sew this together. Okay, so now this beautiful block is assembled, and it's breathtaking to me. I'm sorry. I know that it's whatever. It's just, to me, it is absolutely stunning. I am so in love with this block. Anyway, the next thing that we're going to do is take it over to the table, and I'm going to show you how to press it. So I'm going to recommend that you leave your papers in except for these seams. So the seams here and the seams here, go ahead and pull those out and leave these big papers in. So we're going to go and I'm going to show you how to press it, and then we will be done with this block. Okay, so now we're ready to iron, and I think that most of us know, or at least I think most of us know, that the way you iron a big block like this, or really most of your blocks, really can be important when it comes to the quilting part of it, because you don't want to have too much bulk in too many areas. So the way that you iron this can be detrimental to the way you quilt it. So here's what I'm going to suggest. Now again, you can do whatever you want, but I'm going to suggest that you try to make sure that your sashing pieces or the areas where your sashing is, your seams kind of flow inward. Now this one folded over just a little bit, so we're just going to finger press it back to the center here. And as I've mentioned before, I do not recommend ironing on the paper, and the reason why I don't is because you can end up with ink on your iron, and then when you go to iron the regular side, you're going to get ink on it. So just finger press anything that needs to be nice and flat. Now we're going to take it and iron it flat. So my little wool pressing mat here isn't very big, so I'm going to have to do this in little sections, but I'm just going to move my fingers and make sure that I'm good with my seams there. And I'm just going to kind of move this around in quarters, just because again, the size of my little wool pressing mat is not very big. But I also ironed a bit as I went along. Now, as I said, when I attached these sashing pieces, or one of the sashing pieces, I did iron them flat. It is important to iron your blocks as you go along, especially once you get one of your quadrants done. I would definitely iron it, and that way again you make sure that your pieces line up well and everything looks good. Now it's going to be impossible to reduce all the bulk that's in here, and that's because you've got that little tiny piece in there, and there's just no way to to stop the amount of convergence that's going to be there with all those little 1/4 inch seams. But anyway, at this point, you can definitely remove your papers if you want to. I know that, you know, whatever project you're gonna make, you're gonna need to have more than one block. So obviously this is just block 1 out of however many you need to make. But when it comes to attaching this block to another block, I don't know that I find that leaving the papers in is absolutely necessary. Again, if that's what you want to do, you know, go ahead. But for me, I'm just going to take my papers out. And another thing that I want to stress is I like paper piecing because of the precision. I think that when I use paper piecing, it is far better for my mind to be able to just sew the line and be done with it. I don't have to worry about cutting all these little tiny pieces and all this other stuff. But because there's so many pieces involved in this, I mean, you've got section A, section B, section C, and on and on and on and on and on, you may end up with a little bit of stuff like this. So if you can see, in fact, let me just move it a little closer. So we're just lined up just off just a little bit. This block is very big, and in fact, the pattern comes with, I think, 10.5, 12.5, 14.5, 16.5, and 18.5 unfinished blocks. So they're pretty large. I didn't, this is so much that I didn't want to do too many small blocks, so that's why they're bigger. But there's still enough fabric all the way around this that you can just trim up just a little tiny bit if you need to. So if you need to shave off just a little touch here and a little touch there just to make sure this squares up, you should be good to go. Anyhow, this is the finished block put together and ironed, and I am just in love with it. I think this is going to make an absolutely stunning baby quilt, because that's what I'm going to make it into, is a baby quilt. So 2 of our kids are going to be starting families soon, and we are just really excited about it. So I'm going to go ahead and preemptively make a girl quilt and a boy quilt, and this is going to be the girl quilt. So I'm really excited to see what it looks like in the end, and I will definitely show you as we move along. But anyhow, this block is just exciting to me. I fell in love with it. It is so beautiful, in my opinion. And I plan on making several FPP blocks, or several different FPP patterns that are similar in complexity, because I think that these just add so much to our quilts. Anyhow, I hope that you learned something, and if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, share, leave me a comment down below. Let me know what fabrics you're going to use, and what if you're going to use it for a baby quilt or a king quilt or a pillow or whatever it is you're going to use it for. I hope you guys have a great day, and I will see you again on Friday.